This game against José Luis Alvarez del Monte. Alvarez was born in Gijón, Spain, but he was Uruguayan, champion of Uruguay in 1965 as well as 1968. Born February 16th, 1931. And has he passed away or is he still alive? If he's still alive, he's 93. Let me see. Alvarez del Monte. He's still alive. 93 years old is José Luis Alvarez del Monte. It's amazing. Some of these chess players have quite the longevity. We all know that Bobby's an e4 player, and so no surprise here. e4 it is. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5 for the Ray Lopez opening. a6 for Paul Morphy's defense, bishop a4 for the Columbus variation, knight f6, kingside castles, and bishop e7 for the closed Spanish. Now we get a delayed exchange variation. We haven't seen Bobby play this all too often. Usually he plays the Querés line or the Chicorin line. I have seen him play the regular exchange variation and not too often the delayed exchange, as we see here. Queen's pawn takes the bishop, knight to c3, bishop to g4, pawn to h3. Bishop h5, queen e2, knight to d7 here. Bobby with knight d1 gets a question mark, not the usual move. g4 is usually the move that we'll see here, and that's answered by bishop g6, pawn to d4, pawn takes the pawn, and knight takes the pawn. Knight d1, and I've seen that in other lines, but not this one. Knight c5 is played here, pawn d3. You should play g4 first. The bot agrees. Play g4 first, shove the bishop to g6, and then play d3. Oh, it's still getting a big red X. Knight takes the pawn. Ah, being called for. All right, well, d3 it is. I'm with you, Bobby. I'm with you. With this knight here and this bishop here, bearing down on that pawn there, I'd rather have that d-man right there. Knight e6, and now the threat, of course, is knight to d4. This knight being pinned, so if knight d4 is allowed to be played, knight cannot take knight, else you lose your queen. Therefore, the king's structure will be shredded. For that reason, bishop e3 covers that square. Bishop f6, knight c3, queen e7. Several derogatory marks from the annotator here. Not real clear on these derogatories, except here, Bobby plays knight b1. That better get a derogatory mark. Why is he undeveloping his knight? This is a weird knight. It came to c3, it came to d1, went back to c3, and now has come back to b1. What is Bobby doing? g4 surely makes sense here, hitting that bishop. I mean, several times g4 should have already been played, it feels like. Yeah, I'm not sure what was going on there. I would love to get Bobby's comments on this. Well, g5 is played here, and now the queen's knight comes to d2. Rook g8, getting behind his mobile pawn, so g4 to fix it in place, and a4 being called for here. Interesting. I would think you could play knight c4 first, get a super attack on the e-man. I get a star for this. g4, blockading black's g-man while attacking black's bishop and forcing it to g6. Now knight c4, h5 right here. Knight f4 called for. I would think knight f4 is going to be answered by bishop takes the knight. And normally we like to capture to the center, but because of the presence of our dark squared bishop, this would be an exception. Capture with the e-man here to open this diagonal for the bishop, and that gets a star. Well, I'm glad the annotator agrees with me on that. This is a really good example of when is it an exception. Normally captured toward the center, but there are exceptions, and this is a very notable exception. Open those lines for your long-range attackers. All right, coming back. h5 was played. Knight c takes the e-man, and I would think you could take with either knight. I'm calling for king g2, strange. You could play knight f takes e5. Gets a thumbs up. Probably knight f4 would be played here, and then take the bishop. Don't take the h-man. Yeah, that gets a star. Do not open this file. Open lines for your pieces, not for your opponent's pieces. That's just going to lose. Hit the queen, hit the king. You'd have to block with your knight. Okay, block with the knight. You might be okay. But the eval bar says you're not. You're not okay. That pin is going to be hard to deal with. He's twice pinned. That knight is pinned absolutely by the rook, and a relative pin by the bishop. Get this bishop out of the way and then push that pawn because this pawn is pinned by the queen. There's so many pins here, you could change a diaper. Bishop d4, pinning that pawn, pinning that pawn, pinning that knight, pinning that knight. Look at all those pins. That looks horrific. Oof, don't play. G takes h5. All right, knight c takes e5. Knight f4 was played here. Should capture the pawn first, probably. The bot agrees. Capture the g-man first, and then play knight f4. But knight f4 was played right away. Bishop takes the knight, pawn takes the bishop, and now knight takes the bishop on g6. Rook takes the knight, keeping this open, or trying to open this up, I should say, but keeping that rook on that open file, giving pressure. And so g5 here gets an exclam, because white now is exerting some pressure of his own at last. Alvarez with a queenside castle. c3, blunting this diagonal. He might have wanted to support the g-man first, perhaps. Says that is the best move. I've been doing pretty good with the annotator today, haven't I? I frequently get beaten up by the thing. c3. Bishop takes the g-man, king to h2, getting out of the rook's line of fire. Queen to d6, c5 being called for here. I just now finished drawing this arrow. My choice was queen's rook to g8. I get a thumbs up, getting the battery on the open file. Queen d6, battery attacking this backward d-man. So d4, rook e6, lining up with the queen. Bishop e7 was my thought. No sense in giving white any other attack. I get a thumbs up. Rook e6, bot calling for queen e6. Pawn e5, and this pawn is pinned, so you don't necessarily have to run away. He did run away, played queen e7, but I thought bishop h6, again, get that bishop out of harm's way. So that gets a check mark, and bishop h6 is, boy, I am on fire with the annotator for a change. Get the bishop out of the line of the knight's fire, and we're not worried about pawn takes the queen because rook takes the queen, and that rook is a happy camper on the 7th. Second, it used to be this was black's 7th, and this was white's 7th. In the olden days, each side counted from his own side. Okay, queen e7 was played by Alvarez. Queen e4, king b8, queen f5, super attacking the bishop. So finally, bishop h6 was played. Queen's rook to e1, pawn c5, pawn takes the pawn on c5, queen takes on c5. Queen takes the pawn on f7. That rook is now undefended, so rook d e8 was played. I didn't care for this move. It's fairly passive. It gets marked inaccurate. Rook e7 is what I was looking at, defended by the queen attacking his queen. Furthermore, that facilitates, because the queen's got to move, the rook will be protecting g7, facilitating bishop to g7, which adds another attacker to that guy. So rook e7 better for a lot of reasons. Rook d8 was the choice of José Luis Alvarez del Monte. Bobby with a3 here. Now, is he playing a3? Not sure. Rook e2 is the best move, preparing to double the rooks on the e file. Is he really preparing b4? No. Why? I'm not sure. I don't understand a3. King a7 was played here, and the same as just before. Rook e7, still the best move. Hit the queen and cover the g7 square. King a7, queen d7, queen e7, queen b6. Right, either way, the point of either of these moves is to vacate the c5 square so that the pawn can move there. But queen b6 does so without any other tension. Queen e7 still vacates that square, but it offers the queen. And when you're working from behind, you don't want to facilitate trades. You want to resist trades when you're behind and promote trades when you're ahead. So black should resist trades, so queen b6 is better. Bobby does accept this trade, and rook on e8 captures. Rook g1 takes another open file. King b6, and as I mentioned a moment ago, c5 is what I thought the entire purpose of moving the queen off of c5 was. Put your pawn there. Although black really doesn't have any good moves. c5 is the best choice, the most hopeful, but look at the eval bar. It says doesn't matter what you play, there is no hope. But c5 first, and then king b6 can be played next, for example, after h4. Alvarez with king b6 right away here, and now knight d4, offering up the pawn on e5. All right, knight d4 was played, pawn f3 here. Knight takes the rook, and by the way, the rook was trapped coming back. Can't go here, can't go there because of the knight, can't go there, and can't go there. So the rook was trapped. What about taking the pawn, though? Why didn't he take the pawn? Well, that undefends the bishop. And if you interpose, I'm winning that exchange anyway. So in case you were wondering, why doesn't he just take the pawn? Now you know. So he went with f3 and said, well, I'm losing the exchange anyway, so you might as well have to spend a move, and I'm not going to waste a move trying to fix this. So knight takes e6, rook takes e6. King g3, that prevents the bishop from coming to f4, and black resigned right there. Now let's look at these numbers. 91.6 accuracy for Bobby Fischer with a 2,800 single game performance rating. Again, every single game. Now this was back in the days that people's ratings weren't even over 2,700 yet. No one had yet broken 2,700. Bobby was the first to do it later on, much later than this in his career. And not only did he break it, he shattered it. He shattered 2,700. But his rating was 2,780 or 2,785 when everyone else in the world was only in the 2,600s or less. The top elite players were in the 2,600s. And yet, according to Chess.com's analysis, he was playing like a modern day 2,800 in this game.